Eric, we are looking forward to your trivia question, please.
Excellent. I have one chosen for you. And remember, we've transitioned now into the next generation, so
we'll keep that in mind.
All of you to get, I expect both of you to get all these right. What was the name of Data's android daughter? For these, I'm tempted not to even give you the 4 options.
I can tell you right
now. But I'll give them to you.
Yeah, for those playing at home.
Right. Lore. B. Kamala. C. Lol. D. Leah. The fun level of this game is quite high.
This is misunderstanding of me.
I don't care if I win or lose.
Welcome to a piece of the action. I am Micah.
I'm Eric.
And I'm Greg.
And today we are talking about the game High Frontier for All, a board game by Phil Eklund that just brand new, recently released, I guess. Eric, you said you just got your copy, came in off of Kickstarter?
Just got my grubby mitts on it, yeah.
Okay, so 2020, it is, I guess, a sequel, right, to or another continuation in the High Frontier series, and it is a game that I'm excited to hear about because I really don't know anything about this game other than just the very basic synopsis I gathered when I was prepping for this. So High Frontier for All, 5-player game. Interestingly, it says it has a running time between 30 and 240 minutes. So that is quite a swing, and it looks like it's a pretty heavy game as well. But we will go ahead and get into that in just a moment. Before we do, if you have not subscribed to us yet, please do that. Also, give this video a like, and as you listen to our opinions, please let us know what you think. Leave us a comment below. But let's go ahead now and get right into it. Greg, why don't you start us off with a little bit of an introduction to sort of the premise and some of the basic rules of High Frontier. I'm just going to call it High Frontier. I'm not going to keep saying the whole name.
That's fine. It's fine. And I would call it more of a version of the High Frontiers that came before it. Not so much a sequel. Yeah, it just kind of took the 3rd edition and streamlined it a bit. And also, just to note, it's a 1 to 5 player game. And I think the playing time is probably comes from there's different scenarios in the box. So you can play some shorter scenarios. But I would imagine if you're playing the full-fledged base game, it's going to go 3 to 4 hours probably, especially if you're new. But basically, the premise of High Frontier for All is near-future hard science exoglobalization. You are basically launching rockets into low Earth orbit, and you are basically the rules of the game are there's different sections where you auction off cards to basically get patents that you use to build sections of your rocket, thrusters and robonauts and refineries and things of that nature, which you're going to use. Now, just be FYI, this game has a bajillion rules, so this is super, super high level overview. But the basic idea is you want to take that rocket, fly out to a site anywhere in the solar system. All the asteroids and moons and planets are represented on this board. You get to a site, you prospect it to see if it's something that you can industrialize. If you can, you land on it, you build a factory on it, and that's kind of especially in the base game, that's kind of the main way you get points, is you build factories on it. At that point, you can even start producing on those factories. You can start bringing those products back to Earth, where you can start selling them. You can colonize different sites. It really is kind of a sandbox game, but those are the basic high-level concepts. You're moving around the solar system, industrializing different sites. And there's a little bit of especially playing with Module 0, there's a little bit of a political track going on too, where you're fighting for votes and stuff. But that's it. Just FYI, me and Eric played the base game with Module 0 only. So we're not covering.
So we played the core game. Core rules.
Yeah, so we're not covering the other modules, but we did play with Module 0, which comes in the core box. Yeah, that's the basic idea.
Sounds like, and are you familiar with like the Expanse series? Do either of
Yes.
you?
Oh, the TV show?
Yeah, and the book before that, but it was sort of like a solar system wide, near future hard science type.
I have actually not seen or read any of that.
Yeah. I mean, much less private investigating drama than The Expanse, but the feel of it, yeah, I would say the scope of it is probably, that's about right.
Okay. All right. Well, let's get into that then, Eric. Maybe you can touch on, if that's the premise, how do you feel that it did when it comes to implementing that theme? Does it give you that feel as you're playing?
More than anything I've ever played, I think. I think this game grabs that theme, and Greg mentioned that there's a ton of rules. There are a ton of rules, and you're going to get a lot of the rules wrong. But one of the nice things about the game is that once you've learned about a rule, the way that that rule is implemented in the game is so consistent with logic and reason that it's almost hard to forget. So it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. For instance, at one point in the game that Greg and I just played, I had landed on Mars and had prospected there. And of course, you can take a buggy and go to different locations on Mars, which I had done, and I'd prospected on those other sites as well. But where my rocket had landed on Mars, I was limited to building my factory there. And I was like, well, I've got access to these other places. I prospected these 3 other sites on Mars. Why can't I build my factory on those other sites? But if you think about it, I couldn't haul my entire rocket on my buggy. I can take myself over there and process and look for. And so because the rules are so consistent with logic, though there are a ton of them, the way it implements it it's one of those rare games that combines theme and mechanics into one fluid organism.
That makes me wonder, because usually it seems like games that try to be highly accurate in terms of like what realistically would be possible in the real world. Well, I mean, they do seem to be games that are very complex. The price you pay for that is a lot of complexity and a lot of sort of bogging down with tons of rules and things like that. You don't feel like. Did that happen with High Frontier, or does it happen but it doesn't suffer from it because the rules have some sort of intuitiveness behind them that compensates for it? Is that what you're saying?
I never felt, it's really interesting because I never felt like I was bogged down with the rules, even though.
Yeah, I saw some of the files you guys sent back and forth, and it's like it seems rules heavy to say.
These are the rules.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of stuff in here, but basically, this is the core rules, and it's quite hefty. It's a really thick instruction manual. No, it doesn't bog down. The game flows very, very well.
Okay, so somewhat related to the theme, but not exactly the same thing, is also how did it feel to play? In addition to feeling like you were engaging in exoglobalization, what other things would you use to describe the way it actually felt to play? Maybe, Greg, you want to start off?
Yeah, I mean, it's in this kind of a game, it is really hard to separate the theme from the mechanisms because they're so tightly integrated. But we've been talking about like how many rules there are here. That's true. I want to reference this. So I have a video, hopefully, if I got off my lazy butt, I actually have a video series going on right now. Mm-hmm. The first episode should have come out last month, where I'm
like
going
a Bill and Ted
through,
moment where you're calling it in the future.
Again, actually have not produced these yet in my time, but hopefully in your time I have.
Point up to your left, Greg, like that. See?
Right here. Go here.
There.
I did a good job. That's amazing. But basically, I want to go over the different schools of game design. One of the things you always hear about in gaming, especially when you're new, and you're like, what does that mean? You hear things like Ameritrash and Euro games. And one of the things I want to go through is a series explaining what each of those schools means. So for example, in Ameritrash, typically your core priority is drama. You want to create drama in the game. In a Euro game, it's challenge, right? High Frontier, I don't think fits either of those categories. It's interesting to me when I think about what school of game design is it. The first thing I think about is a war game. And I know this is not a war game because obviously it's not about war. But in a war game, this type of game is very common, right? You have a big, thick rule book. There's all these exceptions to rules. There's all these little sub bullet point to a sub bullet point. That's there, not because of drama, not because it provides challenge, but because that's just how it really is, right? You can't move your troops over here because in real life this was occurring at this time. There was a storm at sea, so you can't go here. You know, or whatever it is that the war game's trying to portray. That's true here. So I think of this as almost a cousin to a war game. So if you're used to that sense where, yes, there's a lot of rules here, but you're doing this for that sense of realism, because that's what a war game is ultimately after, is realism, abstracted to a degree. This is that realism applied to near future solar system exploration. It should be noted, by the way, Phil Eklund is legit in real life a rocket engineer. So he knows this stuff. Like this is actual pretty thoroughly tested science. So, and also in that case, I wouldn't, the feel of play here, I wouldn't consider like a strategy game in the usual sense. Like you're not sitting there working through how I can best beat this player over here, or even a tactical game so much, although it definitely has strategy and tactics. To me, the feel of this game is mission planning. And I don't know what bucket that would go in. Is that logistics or strategy or tactics? But it's like it's planning out, I want to go to this asteroid out here in this belt, and working through everything you need to make that happen safely. And so you don't get stranded in space. So there's a lot of calculating in that sense. And I find in this game, I'm more interested in personal achievement than I am really in winning the game, even though winning is the goal. Like because of that, you think, but again, this all ties to the theme, right? When you think about like real world space missions, it's not like we're sending people over to Europe to sabotage their space program. You know, I mean, it's friendly competition, right? To a certain degree, co-opetition almost to a certain degree. You're all just trying to get, you know, the space race was about who could get to the moon the fastest. And that's really what this game feels like to me, because that's what the theme is about. It's a race to get to different things, get the glory for being the first one to get to Neptune or something like that, get a factory there. So that's kind of how I think of the feel of this game.
The way that the game is, it feels like the premise from the outset was different than most games, whereas most games are trying to create opportunities for tense decisions or critical decision making or just fun, you know, like party games. They are designed in such a way where, like, whatever happens, you're going to laugh, or you're going to have a good time, or you're going to interact in some interesting way. That is not what this game did at all. This game said, let's do something that is as close to hard, you know, near future sci-fi as possible. Let's make it like you're actually designing a rocket that needs to go to some asteroid out there, and put all the math in there, and then just let the game happen on top of that. So that's what I meant before when I was like, the theme is so well integrated, because the premise from the outset wasn't necessarily to have fun or have exciting moments in the game, but it was designed to do this thing as realistically as possible, and then let's put some rules on that, and you can go for it. Fun is almost like a side thought to this.
Yeah, and I think that's basically kind of a similar point. Is like it does have drama, like an Ameritrash does at times, and it definitely has challenge at times. But that's because the theme has that. Like that wasn't their intention, but just in general, space is hard, it's challenging, right? So it's going to have that challenge. But it wasn't like necessarily, they're not putting a mechanism in there specifically for that. They're putting in a realistic mechanism, and the thing that they're replicating is challenging.
Yeah,
right?
which is why I think I think the theme comes first in this game. This is the most thematic game one of the most thematic games I've ever played, because they're not creating mechanics to do anything artificial. It's just, here's what we wanted to do, this real life thing, and here's some rules to accomplish that.
Yeah, thematically this buries everything that we've reviewed so far.
Yeah,
not even close.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's in that regard. Well, Greg, it's interesting because you talked about the similarity to war games, and as you were talking about the rules, and like I said, when I saw the files you guys were sending back and forth, that's very much what came to my mind. Was it seems very war game-esque, but it sounds like it's also very different from any other game that we've considered thus far. given the fact that there are so many rules and it is so heavy weight-wise, why don't we take a moment to talk about beginner priorities and strategies? Eric, why don't you start us off there?
One of my suggestions is going to be read the rule book. It's actually a really nice rule book, honestly. The rules are quite enjoyable to read. Maybe it's just me, but I got a kick out of it. The rule books were very well made.
Your strategy is read the rule book?
Well, look at this thing.
That differs from his strategy for most of the games he plays, you have to admit.
Normally, I just randomly move pieces around and I don't win. But in this game, you need to read the rule book.
But what I will say is that when you read this one in particular, Race for Glory, this one, this is actually technically a mini game. Like, it's a different scenario, but in it is kind of a really, really involved example of play. And as you go through it, they include stuff like, here's a mistake that this guy made. Here's a good strategy that this person implemented. And going through that is going to give you a lot of good tips. But on top of that, I would say that a new player shouldn't make the mistake of trying to create the perfect rocket. Don't create the rocket that's going to be the one rocket to rule them all throughout the rest of the game. Build something quick, build something light. That's really important. Weight is so huge in this game. Build something light that can prospect early. So make multiple short trips. Don't forget that with the cards that are in your hand, they are ideas. They are patents. So you can create and build a solar sail, send that to Mars, land it on Mars, knowing that you're never going to have the thrust to get that thing off, and then just abandon it on Mars. Hey, that's exactly like what people have been doing for years. Sending stuff to the moon and Mars and just leaving it there. That's what's going to happen. You're going to send stuff to, let's say, Mars or the moon. You're not going to be able to get it off because you don't have the thrust to escape the gravity well, but that's okay. You can build another one. So when you decommission that rocket, it goes back to your hand, and you can just send a bunch of stuff to those planets, and then eventually you'll have enough stuff to build a factory. That's really the goal, is you want to send enough things to the planets where you can, or sites where you can build a factory, maybe even put a colony on there, and start building better stuff. You can build better stuff when you're outside of the Earth's gravity well. So that's the idea. Short, repeated trips, decommission those rockets, rebuild them on Earth, do it again, send stuff there. Don't try to be perfect, but also remember that when you have to create a factory, this really messed me up, so I'm sore about this. When you have to create a factory, don't forget that everything that you decommission in order to create that factory also has to be decommissioned. So if you've got a refinery that you need to cannibalize to turn it into a factory, not just the refinery needs to go, but the thing that fueled that refinery, that made that refinery functional, as in a generator or something along those lines. Well, if you need that generator also to fuel your rocket to get you home, you're stuck on that site. So don't forget those two things, and just get out there early. Don't wait around for building the perfect rocket. That's my tip.
Easy enough. Greg?
So in line with Eric's read the rulebook strategy, I would say the strategy for this game should be get the most victory points.
Hey.
No. I mean, that is a good strategy, but
these are pretty unorthodox ideas, but continue.
I'm usually pretty hesitant to give strategy tips in games, but I'm even more so in this game because I'm very much a newbie at this, and there's so much going on here. I do want to echo Eric's statement, though. That was one of the points I have written down here, is you don't need to build a super rocket on your first go around. I think that's a mistake a lot of new people make. So the way that the rocket patents come up is it's kind of like an auctioning system, and there's 6 different parts that you can collect, and there's only one available at a time. So I think sometimes you get in the habit of, okay, I got this thruster, but that means I'm going to need this type of reactor, and then you might want to just wait for that reactor. I say just kind of see what you're getting through the auction, what's it giving you, and then after that, work out where you can go with the pieces that you're actually getting. I think the mistake least I made in the beginning, goes, hey, I want to go to this asteroid. And then I figure out, what do I need? What kind of components do I need? I want to build a factory. So that means I need this type and this type. And then you're just waiting. Like one of these games we played, I spent half the game just playing the auction, trying to get my perfect rocket together. But I agree, you don't need to build a factory right away. And that's kind of the part I had to get over. Just get out and prospect some places. I mean, once you prospect, you get to claim that site. And in a few turns in the game, there might be things like anarchy where people could potentially steal that, but it's not huge. For the most part, that's safe. And then you can come back later and bring the components you need for a factory and or a colony if you really want to do that. So yeah, just work with what's given you. And there's no such thing as a perfect rocket in this game. I don't think you'll ever get it. Also, you have to realize in order for you to get certain, this game is basically how far can you think ahead in your mission. So beyond just sometimes you're just like, hey, I just want to land on this planet, and then you realize you're stuck, or you got nothing to do. I mean, or you get out there, you get a factory. I mean, there's also beyond that. You can think of what can I produce on this planet? Not planet, but site. So different sites have different spectral types. So there's like carbon sites, there's metal sites, there's like dark sites, things of that nature. And that's going to dictate what cards you can produce once you get a factory going there. Those can be worth a ton of money. So even looking ahead at that, like, okay, once I get there, I can start producing C cards. So let me start getting the C cards. Like all that's like planning ahead. Another one is just being familiar with the map. The map on this game can confuse you because things that look really far away, I mean, I'm sure you'll put it up on the screen, but this map is ridiculous. I'm going to bring it up again later on in our review, but it's things that look really far away are often not as far away as you think they are, and they're not as hard to get to as you think they are. So there are cheats. I have not actually seen them, but I know there are player aids out there that will give you like a listing of like, here's all the spectral types. This is how many burns it takes to get to each of them, and you can see a more succinct categorization about how far things are away. But being familiar with like, okay, I got this card and this card and this card and this card, where is the best place for me to go is going to become you being familiar with the map and just knowing where's a good place for me to go with the cards that I have. I have a solar sail. What can I do with a solar sail? You know, that kind of stuff is good to know. So just becoming familiar with the map and recognizing what my card combo currently allows me to do. I think it's better playing according to what the auction gives you and not forcing the auction to fit your demands, if that makes sense. So right. That's kind of my high level strategy.
More flexibility there. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Very nice. It reminds me of what you're talking about. Are you guys familiar with like, I think there's supposed to be some principle in terms of real life space flight where they say that if you're figuring out how long it's going to take you to get somewhere and it's going to take more than 50 years, then it's better to wait for a faster technology to be developed, to be built, or something like that.
Funnily enough, this game goes 48 years in game time.
Supposedly,
we didn't talk about that in the premise, but supposedly 48 years was chosen because you're one person who has entered into the space program, and generally a person's lifetime is about 48 years. Mm-hmm. So this is what you're doing from the moment you walk into NASA or whatever program you're in until you retire. So interesting. 48 years.
I've only got 6 years left of my life. What are you telling me, Greg?
Oh, you get to retire in 6 years.
Oh.
No, it's from when you graduate your school, your space school, wherever they go, to you retire. So.
Yeah, I say 50 years. That could be wrong, but I remember there was some idea like that like what you're talking about in terms of just the general idea that maybe sends stuff out there and we don't exactly know how it's going to work out, but we know we're going to continue to progress, and we're going to factor that in as a thing that's probably going to happen. And using that in a strategic way. So, okay, very interesting. But again, it sounds like it goes right along with that sort of simulationist vibe very strongly. All right, let's go in now to talk about the things that High Frontier for All did well. We're going to talk about the good and the bad, but we'll start out with the good, and we will start out with Eric, please.
So High Frontier does quite a few things really, really well. I mentioned the rule books already. They're very well written. They are staggered, where you can start with a very, very simple game called Space Diamonds. It's almost too simple, but it gets you it can be played with a family even.
Yeah, Space Diamonds to me was basically a different game. It just looks like a really random family weight game.
It's a family weight game, but what it does is it teaches you how to move, how to use the map. So Greg mentioned the difficulty of the map. The map is the one thing that's going to push people away from this game the most. Space Diamonds tries to overcome that, I think. I think that was the goal.
Yeah, I agree.
However, I will say
Space Diamonds is like a little mini game that you can play if you don't want to play the full game. Okay, got it.
It's like this 3-4 page rule book. It just basically is about movement on the map. However, here's the cool thing. Space Diamonds comes, actually most of the components in the game are the vast majority of separate components in the game box that comes with the game are for this game called Space Diamonds, because they all come with these little tokens that are rated according to what spectral type of planet it is, and you randomly put them down, kind of like they're discovery tokens, right? Like discovery chits in like Eclipse or something like that, where if you go there, you get to get this thing, and it could be aqua, or it could be little diamonds or things like that, and you just go around collecting stuff. That can be included in any other form of the game. So if you wanted to, you could add those little chits all over on the regular core game of High Frontier, just to add a little bit of like fun to it. And that is a great example of the best thing in this game, which is it feels like a toy box. When I open High Frontier, it feels like I get to play with all this stuff. It just feels so awesome. It's like a dozen different ways to play this game, include in the rules that come with it. Not to mention, who knows how many more that are online that fans have made. I played one. I think this is the best solo game that I own. I played several times solo. And by the way, the 30-minute thing that you talked about before, that's probably solo, because those solo games, they go by really fast. So I played a solo scenario that was there's two asteroids, the Hermes asteroids A and B, and they're heading for Earth, and you need to keep thinking Independence Day. What's the name of the movie?
Like Deep Armageddon?
Armageddon. You need to Armageddon your way out there and attach dirt thrusters onto these asteroids so that they can like move them. You don't blow them up, but you like have to put thrusters on these things so that you divert them away. And you've got only like 24 years to do it in. It's so much fun. And when I played that, I realized I could make my own version of this. Like I could come up with different scenarios that I wanted to do. For example, I found that the rules for getting cards was a little too restrictive. Maybe I want to play an easier version of it. Maybe I just want to have fun. So I take away the support requirements, and then I can get out to Hermes and take care of those asteroids. It's just like it's a toy box. You open the thing up, and it's like there's so many different things that I can do with this game that I can just make stuff up. I can invent stuff because the rules are there to facilitate me coming up with different adventures and stuff. All of that kind of goes hand in hand with what Greg said early on. He said that he's not playing, he typically doesn't feel like he's playing for victory points, even though the game is about victory points. You're playing for personal achievement. That's exactly how I feel. When I'm playing High Frontier, I feel like I don't care if I win or lose. I just want to get to that stupid asteroid that has that's out in the Neptune region, and I want to get there and land on that thing. I don't care what it takes, So there's a real sense of achievement that is included in this game. One of the reasons it's so good solo, by the way, is the setup and the breakdown is super simple. There's nothing to set up in this game. It's all the complexity is built into the map itself and is in your head. There's none of the artificial complexity that comes with the TI4 level of pieces and parts. I love TI4. Don't get me wrong, but all of the complexity in this game is built into the math. Also, I think I showed you before, a lot of games this weight, or not, maybe not even this weight. A lot of games are, the box size is enormous. Like Rebellion, Star Wars Rebellion is huge. My expanded version of Scythe is enormous. This is a very modest, normal sized box. Normal sized boxes are very important. Yeah, I think I'll stop there. But there's just the fun level of this game is quite high.
Cool. Greg?
Yeah. First off, when you were asking for an asteroid movie, I offered Deep Horizon, which is not a movie. The only entry for that in Wikipedia is a D&D module or something. Deep Impact was when I was offering.
At least it was on topic.
Deep Impact or Event Horizon.
Deep Impact was the one I was trying to offer. Anyways, I'm not a movie guy. I don't know. Yeah, basically, the good for this game, if I had to sum it up, and my first idea in this game is, if you like the idea of hard science, near future, solar system exploration, if that interests you as a subject, this is your game. Because to me, that's the reason I play it. I'm hesitant to use the term edutainment because that's got a bad vibe to it. But usually just for kids, right? But this is like edutainment for adults. Because yes, you are definitely having fun playing this game. But the thing I like the most about this game is I am learning about actual science as I play. Eric mentioned those rule books. There's tons of footnotes that explain the science behind it. There's an appendix that comes with this game that's just amazing. Like, it takes each technology, every single patent card that you have in this game, you can look that up in the appendix, and it explains what this thing is actually doing. How is it working? What is the science behind this technology card? And that's just awesome. And even after, this is one of the games where after I'm done playing, I want to go to the internet and start looking up stuff like, oh, why is it that way? Why is this thing that way? Eric talked about also like how the rules match the theme. I agree 100%. And anytime a rule doesn't make sense, you know how you fix that? Go and learn the science as to why that rule's there. Once the science makes sense, the rule makes sense. That's just the way. And so just that idea of just learning a subject that I find interesting to begin with is just my main appeal of this game. It's you're having fun learning about an awesome subject. Beyond that, I think a special shout out belongs to the map, the board. The board of this game is just phenomenal. I talked about how there's a lot going on it, but what's awesome about this board is it's basically taking the orbital mechanics of our solar system and simplifying it onto a board form. Like, everywhere you go on this board, there's different hazards you can go through. There's radiation belts you can go through. You can do flybys of, you can do like flybys around the sun. You can slingshot around the sun like they did in Star Trek 4. You don't go
and go back in time and find whales.
That's right. That exists. No. Although it would be easy to put in here. That could be like module 4. The whale explorations. But no, you can do all of that because it happens in the real solar system. Like, all this stuff exists. And every single, there's so many asteroids and moons and that are put on this map that you can go look up and say, well, why is this way? Why is this way? But the orbital mechanics, let me get back to that. Like Lagrange points. Lagrange,
I believe.
Lagrange
points, I think. It's basically, those are all like mapped out on the board. Holman turns and things like that are all mapped out on the board. And these are things you just learn as you play. Learning about like, I don't know, I'm going on that, but it's like basically taking all of that science, all of that math that would normally be required, and it just simplifies it onto this board. So you're not thinking about it as you play, but it's all accurate. I love that map. That map is just amazing. I would like to hang that map on my wall. It's that kind of map.
Oh, the art. The art in this game is amazing.
Yeah, it's really good.
And there's not much of it, but the art is just, I don't know, you're probably not going to be able to see this, but like shots like this where you've got these massive, these really great space shots, and then there's always this one little human bit there. It's just beautiful.
Yeah, it's great. And I know there's a lesser extent But another thing, I like how they condense this complicated science to a very simple thing for a board game, is the fuel chart on the rockets. So there's a fuel chart, basically, because Eric mentioned mass is such a big deal in this game, right? So it's as you fill up, you have a dry weight, a dry mass that you indicate on your chart. You have a wet mass that you indicate on your, I said dry weight, dry mass, and a wet mass that you indicate on your chart, right?
In that deep horizon that you're talking about.
Yes. And so when you want to know, like, how much fuel am I going to burn, for example, to do this maneuver or something, it's going to matter on the mass of your rocket. And how fast can you go? So this chart, basically, as you move up the chart, you follow one line. As your fuel goes back down the chart, it follows a different line. And the lighter you are, the more a fuel burn will get you. It's hard to explain, so I'm sure you'll put it up on the screen. But basically, it's the steps become more minute the lighter you get. That's all factored in, and you know it's accurate, right? So this one step of fuel is going to get me much further if I'm lighter. You don't have to worry about that. It's not like you're constantly calculating that in your head. This chart works that math out for you. I just think that's super cool. Next, sense of accomplishment. We've talked about that a few times. The first time you get a rocket out into space is what Eric calls a high five moment. It's just, it feels amazing the first time you actually get your rocket leaving Leo or low Earth orbit and you actually land on a planet, or the first time you actually take back off of a planet. It just feels awesome.
Bigger.
Yeah, getting back off a planet, especially if you land like Mars or something. Landing on Mars, but each of those are, because it's such a challenge to do it. It just feels great. And you know, you can kind of get a sense, like in real life space program, why they get so excited when they go do these things, because there's a lot of calculating you do to get there. I just think that's cool. And then Eric kind of talked about the playground aspect of this game. I think that's true even with the base game without adding in other versions of the game. I talked about this map. There's huge sections of the map I have never been to. I don't think I've never been to Neptune. Have you been to Neptune yet, Eric? It's there. No. It's there. And there's a huge section of the board that I have never even been into. But knowing that one day, when I get better at this game, maybe I can get a mission out to the moons of Neptune or Pluto and come back to Earth. You know what I mean? That's still like an achievement that I haven't got to yet. But this game really provokes that. Sometimes I want to do things not to win because I haven't done it yet. Like, you know what? I've been to that asteroid before last game. I want to go to this other one over here and see what that's like. I don't know. That it just kind of really provokes that sense of exploration and sense of achievement in you as you play the game. So I don't know. That's kind of the good of this game. There's a lot there, but
yeah, it sounds like you're basically talking about that. It goes back to that simulationist sort of idea again, that all of the emotion and striving and sense of achievement that comes with natural space exploration, just writ small on a board game, is what a large part of it would be. All right, let's go ahead though and flip it around and talk about what High Frontier could have done better. So Greg, let's go back to you and talk about the bad.
So as often with my bad sections, these are things that I don't particularly consider bad, but these are things when I think about pulling it out with certain people, what I think is going to be the highest boundary to get people into it. The number one reason I could see people not wanting to play this game is the rules. I mean, we've been talking about the whole game, this whole review. So on BGG, by the way, this player aid on BGG, is this included in the game?
It is, yeah.
Okay, this player aid that it comes with is awesome. I love this player aid. But you get this 6 pages for a player aid. I mean, one of these is the modules, but 5 pages of fine print rules for a player aid, which is longer than many board game rulebooks. There's a lot going on in this game. And I think if I sat down and taught every rule in this game, not doing the modules, you're talking about like a good hour long or more teach. I mean, there's a lot of rules. And it's not just that, but navigating the game. There's a huge learning curve, trying to figure out what you can do, what everything, even if you know the rules, trying to remember everything and be able to calculate all that is going to take a few games for that to smooth out. So I don't think that's a bad thing, because I enjoy that in games. I enjoy learning about it. But I could see how this might be a game that's hard to pull out for people if that's not their thing. If you pull out that map and their eyes glaze over, they're not the people for you. So that's just one thing. And and that's the two, is like trying to calculate an asteroid mission takes so much work. Me and Eric kind of joked about this today, but I think the tagline for this game should be, "Oh, I didn't do the math right," because you say that constantly in this game. There's on top of it, there's a lot of randomness. And normally I would rail against randomness, but you have to be prepared that there's hazard rolls in this game that if you roll a d6, if you roll a 1, your whole rocket blows up. Now, there's ways to mitigate that. You can spend 4 aqua, which is the currency in this game, to do the failure is not an option roll, which is
fantastic. It's a fantastic rule, by the way. Go ahead and explain it.
But basically, the idea is you spent more money on your programmers to do a better job of programming your stuff. So you don't have to roll that hazard roll. But 1 in 6, when odds are not bad, it's tempting to just kind of like go with it. But you have to also be cool with the idea that your rocket might just blow up. But on top of that, there's pad explosions, things that just blow up in orbit in Leo, because I don't know why that happens, but maybe debris.
Debris. You know what it is? It's space debris, because of the whole space around the Earth is junky. So the pad, most people think of the pad as like Houston, but no, it's actually, you're in low Earth orbit, so stuff can hit your launching pad.
Yeah, I assumed it was something like that, especially if we're in the near future. You got more rockets in space. But anyway, so you got that can just destroy parts of your ship. There's budget cuts, which makes you like, that can possibly happen because it kind of simulates the politics of this era. So you might have to discard a card. There's purges if you're playing with the political stuff. There could be like anarchy, which like one of your delegates could just get kicked out. So there's a lot of like roles that are random. Normally, I'm against that in a game, but I understand in this game it's doing it because of the theme. This is something that actually happens. But you got to go in knowing that, and you got to be cool with that. So, I mean, just to give you an example of how a combination of how hard it is to read out your missions, plus the randomness in this game. This is an experience I had in one of our games that I think is very common. But basically, I got my ship it took me like, this is the game where it took me like half the game basically, to get my rocket together. And I finally had everything that I wanted. And I go out, and there's a radiation belt around Earth, by the way, that if you ever play this game, you're going to start hating this radiation belt that's around Earth. I didn't even know it existed before this game, but now that I know it exists, I don't like it. Anyways, there's a radiation belt around Earth you always have to go through. So you have to do a radiation check when you go through it. Now your parts have like radiation hardness that you can use to like get through it, or if your thrust is good enough, you can get through it no problem. Well, I miscalculated. Again, I didn't do the math right. And I got to this point, and I'm like looking at my stuff. I'm like, wait a minute, I got to make a radiation check here. If I roll a 4 or higher, I'm just going to blow up. These parts are going to blow up, So like, and I rolled it anyways because I was frustrated. I'm like, well, I'm already going. Let's go. And I ended up losing my radiator, which would have defeated the purpose of trying to build a factory. So I had to basically turn around the next turn, come back to low Earth orbit, and rebuild my rocket, basically. Anyways, that stuff happens all the time. You have to want that. You have to love that kind of stuff, unless you're a genius and you can calculate all of this like space programs do, and you take the time to calculate all that. Those are things that are going to happen. Your rocket's just going to blow up. But it can be mitigated. A lot of that can be mitigated, but it can be frustrating. Okay, the only thing that I personally think maybe the game could have done better, that's my own personal flaw with the game. I'm not a huge fan of the auctions, which is a little sad because it's such a massive part of the game. Basically, like I said, you got one card that sits on top of each deck. You put that up for auction, and then you just kind of bid on it. Sometimes it's like, man, I want just one type of generator that I need, but that's not the one that's on top of the deck. So maybe I auction off that card just to see what's next on the deck. Oh, it's not there either. Oh, and the card I just auctioned off, I won. I have a 4-card limit, so now I can't participate in the next auction. At times, I just found the auction to be a little frustrating because it's super random, and it's maybe it's just my incompetence with the game, but it's like I just sometimes wish there was an easier way to get my parts. Yeah, so I wasn't a huge fan of the auction system in this game. It works, but yeah, that was the only part that I probably could have seen being done better. That's it. That's where I'm at.
Eric, let's go to you. What do you think that High Frontier could have done better?
So I want to suggest something, and I don't necessarily think this is true, but it was something my wife mentioned. She looked at the map. You mentioned the map as the biggest choke point for people, or the rule density, which is exemplified in the map. And she said, this is stupid. This could have been done better. And so I got to thinking about that. And I thought to myself, this could have been a flowchart, as my wife mentioned it. This could have been just a flowchart. Wouldn't have looked anything like the solar system. But I wanted to ask you, Greg, what do you think about that? Because if it was done as a flowchart, I almost feel like the map is, you could just study that map, and if you studied the map, you would get really good at this game. You'd be like, okay, I know that I can go here. They've done some little footnotes. There's some road signs that say to get to Mars is 3 burns, or what have you. But it looks like you're looking something up right now. There's probably flowcharts that have been made.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking up. I believe they have made charts for this. I don't know if it's a flowchart per se, but there are charts that kind of basically numberify the whole board.
Mm-hmm. In some ways, I almost feel like that's, I don't know. I agree that it could be simpler, but I almost feel like
it goes against the spirit of.
Yes, I feel like it's the obtuseness of having to get a rocket to this place, and you've got to stare at that map for like 10 minutes and be like, okay, if I go, no, that doesn't work. What if I go this way? What if I slingshot around? Okay, and that's the game. And if you just flowchart that out, it's almost like you could cheat.
I think having the flowchart in addition to the map makes sense to me, if you really want to get that serious into it. But, and this is weird because normally I'm all about spreadsheeting things out in a game,
Mm-hmm.
but in this game, that would just take away so much for me if I
wasn't the purpose, right? It sounds
flying around the solar system on a map, which is a weird thing for me to say, but in this game, it needs to have the solar system represented for me to feel like I actually want the Neptune. You know what I mean?
That's that's what I came down to.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I think you
Greg
can have
finally
that
understands what it's like, what it means to play a game for theme.
No, I do. This is
Exactly.
this is a misunderstanding of me. I am completely okay. I'm completely okay playing a game for theme if that's what the game is meant to be about.
Yeah.
Which this game is, but I don't feel the need to add theme to strategy games per se. But I don't play this as a strategy game. For me, this is like a war game. I approach it to learn about the subject.
Which, by the way, you're terrible at war games.
I am terrible at war games. I'm horrible at war games. But I don't. But I approach them differently. I approach this game. I approach them to learn about.
You're
the subject.
right. When you mentioned that, I was like, oh yeah.
Yeah. To be fair to Greg, his real life ability to launch rockets is also.
This is true.
Mediocre at best.
Wait till I get through my space school.
Yeah.
When you made that comparison to a war game, I was like, yeah, no, that's a really good comparison.
This is a fight I've been having in my head preparing these videos about war games, because I feel like there's other games that could fit in this category, but the category is called war game. So nobody wants to put games in that category that are not about war. But I think the category would be better served being called simulationist games.
Or they don't want to put games that are, the Dice Tower talks about this sometimes. They don't want to put games that are about war but super simple in the
There was a
category.
massive argument about Twilight Struggle being a war game or not.
Right, exactly.
Just me saying that has caused about 20 grognards to get into a fist fight. Right now. Just like the reverberations of that statement, to saying Twilight Struggle is a war game. But I think if you stop thinking about
somewhere in the world,
somewhere,
a grognard sheds a tear.
He's like, I sense a disturbance in the war game force. Anyways, but I think if you stop thinking about, and I understand war games are about war, but it's like if you stop thinking about war games as as that and just think of them as simulations about something that just happen to have a bunch of games about war. Simulationist is a category that has a lot of games about war. Then it's easier to put something like Twilight Struggle in as that category.
Exactly.
I think personally. Historically, I understand why the title exists though. Yeah. Anyways, that's another topic.
I'll give another shout out then to your series, Greg, because I think that's going to be something I'm going to look forward to as I look forward to you producing it and me watching it. Is classification of board game schools, and you know, how games get in to those classifications, and the rationale behind why a game goes into one classification or another. Although it seems to me like it, you know, I don't know, we haven't talked about this and remains to be seen what you say in your videos, but it seems to me like a very natural sort of fundamental core way to classify games would be by why do players play them. And you know, like you said, like if Ameritrash, if the point is to create drama, that speaks to player motivation as opposed to describing like the more superficial aspects of
sure.
it.
I think it's more like designer priority, like what was the designer trying to
and so
prioritize with the rule set.
So with that in mind, it could be that a war game speaks to a genre where the goal, the core engagement of the game is that simulationist feel, and it just happens to be the case that wars are great to simulate.
Yeah, you know? That's they have a long history. But anyway,
right.
yeah, I mean,
yeah. So anyway, not to get too far off it, but I'm just
and I will talk about this in my Wargame episode. But
sure, yeah, I'm looking forward to that too, by the way. But that having been said, all of this is just an example of what I think is bad or could be bad. You know, the density of the game. I don't think the reason people shy away from war games is because it's about war. People play games about war all the time. That's not what makes a war game in the colloquial. I think most people think of war games as a certain weight, a certain density, a certain simplicity of components. But that's what's going to be a choke point for this game too. It's just the rules are very dense. I don't care about that. What I do care about is mistakes, and it can be troubling. And if this bothers you, this could be considered a bad for the game. When the rules are so complex that you're bound to make mistakes, and you find out that, oh, Greg shouldn't have been able to get to that asteroid, you know, because he forgot about this rule. But that was 10 turns ago. And it's like, well, what do you do? You know, that thing is always a little troubling in games. That could be a negative.
I agree that it's your first few games are very easy to make rules mistakes here.
Yeah.
And anytime I enter a game like this, or a war game, in fact, I just kind of go in with the assumption I'm going to make rules mistakes the first few games.
And you got to be ready to do that.
Yeah, you just got to go with the flow with that.
But more than that, you've got to be willing to allow what I'm talking about is you've got to be willing to allow mistakes from the other person.
Sure.
Because that can be troubling.
If you're playing this like a hyper competitive mindset, you're playing the wrong game to start with.
Don't play this game if you're playing to win. Play it to enjoy the toy box that is the game.
Exactly. Yeah.
That is another root of another possibly bad thing, which is that you can get shut out of this game. You can get shut out of winning the game because of a pad explosion where your stuff just blows up, you know, which is part of the simulation, but it could happen. Now, lastly, I want to talk about auctions. I think the auctions are actually really good. So I don't think there's any problem with the auction. I think that, no, I take that back. I do think there's a problem with the auctions, but I think it only applies to, say, 2-player games. In a 2-player game, the auction rules, the auction dynamic is so simplistic that I can't work it. I can't game it. Nobody can game the auction system. Whereas in a 3-player, let's say I look at the board, and here's where player interaction comes in. Because the only thing, and I'm surprised you didn't mention player interaction, Greg, because player interaction
I was going to. I forgot to.
is one component of this game where it's like, well, you're just flying around in space. Space is big. You're not really going to have. There's a module coming out about conflict. It's not out yet, and even the conflict that does exist is just going around on a buggy and putting holes in the other people's tents. That's it. That's conflict. But there's not a lot of, you wouldn't think there'd be a lot of player interaction except for the auction aspect. And the auction component, I think, introduces a really good level of player interaction. It's very tense, but I don't think that comes out in a 2-player game, which is the only thing that you've played. In a multiplayer game, I can look at your boards and say, he needs a generator. There's a generator right down here. He needs a generator too. I'm going to put this generator up for auction and make them bid on it so that I get the money. That's a thing that you can game in the auction system if there's more than 2 players. Doesn't exist in a 2-player game. And honestly, I think it's a little too harsh in a solo game. I maybe I'm just bad at this game, and I probably am. But in a solo game, it's really hard to get the first 20 or 30 turns in a solo game are just taking components, selling components, taking components, selling components. If there's a better way, I don't know what it is.
Well, there is a way that you can start out with components, I think. You can skip the options kind of in the beginning. There's a variant to the game. I'm not interested in that. But I just to kind of talk about the auction still, it's not that I'm against the auction system per se. And I'm not even against it. This is a potential thing I thought could have done better. I like economic games. I like auction games. So it's more, and maybe I'm not good at it. And the more I play it, the better I'll get the auctions. But it's just waiting for a particular card to come up just seems so aggravatingly hard sometimes.
Yeah.
When it's just, you know what I mean? And I guess the rest of the game, I talk about how I'm cool with the randomness because I'm entering the game with a thematic approach. Like, I'm okay if I try to like just Han Solo my way through an asteroid belt. You know, I have to make a hazard roll for that. I have potential of blowing up. I'm 100% on board with that. But my thing with the auctions is maybe part of it is I have a hard time mapping my brain to what is this representing in real life? Like, what economic system are we playing here where auctions?
We're inventing patents, and it's the intellectual property aspect. I don't have a problem with that necessarily. Mechanically, I think that the only thing that it adds to the game is it adds player interaction. And I think it does a good job of that, but I don't think it does a good job of it 2-player or solo. I think
maybe
you have
that's
to have
it.
a
You're right.
3-player game of this.
I only played on 2 players, so maybe I just had a bad. Again, it's not bad. It was not as, I like auctions typically in games, and I just did not find this one to be that exciting. But part of that too might be, it's hard to know what's good in this game when you first start playing. You know what I mean? It's hard to know what are the good cards. It's like, is this a good card? Is this reactor any good?
It's almost like Twilight Imperium, not Twilight Imperium. It's almost like Twilight Struggle in that sense. You've got to learn the decks a little bit.
Yeah, I think as you play this game and you get more used to what cards are good and what good combos exist in the decks, that auction could become a lot more exciting, because then I'm going to put this good card up for auction, like you said, and have other people fight about it. So I 100% agree that this might just be my A, noobness, B, 2-player game, and 3, my general incompetence as to why the auctions were not as exciting to me as I wanted them to be. They're not bad. For me, they fell a little flatter than the rest of the game did, I guess.
Sure.
I think that's probably something we've got to, there should be a general grain of salt, I think, with anything that we say is good or bad, that is probably going to be, that your mileage is going to vary depending on, like, among other things, your own personal level of experience with the game. Something you think it's good, maybe if you're super, super pro at the game, you realize it's not as good as you think, or vice versa.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, Greg's favorite movie is Deep Horizon. So
that's true.
Take that with a huge grain of salt.
I don't know why I didn't win the Oscar that year. I really don't.
Well, let's go then to our final thoughts. Anything that you guys want to say? So let's just hear your final thoughts first, and after that we'll get to the rating, and we'll talk about whether or not it should go on our shelf. But let's start with Greg. Anything you want to say about it that you have not already said?
Yeah, I think I give this game an 8. Is my final rating. So that's in the band of where I would want to play the game myself. Like, I would want to get groups together to play this game. It's on the lower end of that band, I think, mostly because I don't know that I want to play this every single week. I don't want to constantly pull this game out, but it's the kind of game, especially if you add modules 1 and 2, and this becomes like a big 7-8 hour epic game. I could see it being like one of those big annual events. You get some people over, you sit down, you play this game. But I still love the game. I still want to play it. It's just a little bit outside my wheelhouse. I'm typically a big fan of the economic games. So it's when I'm in the mood though for this type of space exploration, I can't think of any other game that comes even close. So I do love this game. It is an 8. If you have any interest in near future exoglobalization, you will also love it. So that's it. That's my final thoughts.
Okay, Eric?
So my only final thought on this is that this game is, if you are familiar with the Agricola level games, we love that game. That's a great game. It's a fairly dense game. If you're familiar with that, or Pandemic, or other popular games that are out that are technically hobby games, this game makes you realize that there's a whole nother level on top of all that stuff. There are these types of games that it feels like a different creature. It's like the difference between all you've ever played is Monopoly, and then you learned about Agricola. This is, if all you've ever played is Agricola or Pandemic or Codenames, and then you play this game, it's, to me anyway, it's that level of difference where it's like, wow, there's a whole nother thing out there that we can get into. I give this game a 9. I'm kind of obsessed with this game. I think it's fantastic. The only thing that I would want it to do better is I would want to be able to blow people up. I like conflict. Module 4. It's
4?
It's coming out. Conflict. Wait, am I right?
No, I think it's module 3. It is. I'm looking at it right now.
It's module 3.
Yeah. Politics is module 0.
But I want
computer programmers based on the array system. So
there's but it won't be the kind of conflict that I like. The kind of conflict that I like is the kind of, that Twilight Imperium conflict, that wargamey kind of thing where you can go in and make a breakthrough and you can see on the map the players scatter before you like scared roaches. I like that level of player interaction conflict. This is never going to give me that, but that's such a small thing. I can play that in a million different games. This game gives me things that I've never experienced in any other game, and I highly, highly recommend it if you are okay with not winning and just going out and having fun in a sandboxy kind of space exploration way.
All right, good. So Greg gives it an 8, Eric gives it a 9. So I think other than Go, that's got to be the highest rated, the highest average.
It'd be hilarious.
The two of you, right?
It'd be hilarious if we should do like a reverse Tom Vassell on this, and like whenever we rate something really, really highly, we don't put it on the shelf. We're like, I don't like it.
Yeah, actually, you're right, because the next highest was Agricola, but I think our average ratings between the two was 8.25.
Yeah.
Because I gave that an 8. I gave it an 8.5. Eric gave it an 8. So this is an 8.5 average. So yeah, this, besides Go, this is our highest rated so far.
So it reminds. I was going to ask while I think of it, have either of you played Kerbal Space Program?
I was thinking about this.
Yeah, because that's very much what it sounds like, right?
It gets compared to it often.
Yeah.
But isn't Kerbal Space Program, I've never played Kerbal Space Program, but from what I understand, isn't it more about the rocket building aspect?
Yes.
I think there's less of that.
I mean, there's still, you got to launch the thing, you got to land it, you've got to do all the math. But it's less about colonization, and there's some of that, though.
More just getting off the ground.
Yeah, I think the focus, from what I understand of the game, I think the focus is shifted a little more from the rocket building aspect in this game to the more bigger picture industrialization and things of that, exploration of the solar system.
Okay.
But it's a good analogy.
There's some of that. There's some of that in both games, I think.
Yeah. All right. Well, so let's talk then. It sounds like you both love the game. So my guess would be that you'd want to put it on the shelf. Do you guys want to put it on the shelf? If so, what do you want to kick off? Greg, why don't you start?
Yeah. Even though this is not like I said, this is not a game I'm going to want to pull out weekly. There's enough mediocre games on the shelf, and I like this game enough that I am willing to kick something out for it. So I'm gonna kick it over to Eric, because you can't say Ticket to Ride. There are a few games.
No, I wasn't going to say Ticket to Ride.
Okay, there's a few games I'd be willing to let go for this. So I just want to hear what you're going to want to kick off.
Would you be willing to let Puerto Rico go?
Yeah, I would.
That's the one I was thinking of. Not necessarily, mostly because Puerto Rico is so finicky and this game is so finicky. It does very different things, I understand. But I have softened on your idea, Greg, of making sure that the shelf can accommodate different types of people. But the one thing that I love about my personal shelf is that there's nothing on this shelf that I wouldn't want to play, regardless of weight or player count. I love all the games that I own, mostly. And so, like, with that in mind, I wouldn't want to pull Puerto Rico out with people who couldn't handle a really, really meaty, dense game that where one thing goes wrong. Because Puerto Rico, one little thing goes wrong, it's kind of hard to catch up and hard to get back to it. So I was thinking Puerto Rico.
The reason I'm okay with Puerto Rico, for me anyways, is we do have Power Grid and Agricola on the shelf. I kind of feel they're in the same. I would pull them out in similar scenarios. So I'm okay, and especially since we're putting in a really heavy game, I'm okay pulling. I mean, Puerto Rico's probably midweight, but still, it's heavier than what we have on the shelf. So I would be.
Puerto Rico kind of broke my mind a little bit. Like it's dense as far as I'm concerned.
It is. I love Puerto Rico. Don't get me wrong. I do love it, but I mean, there's a few games. I like Agricola and Power Grid better than Puerto Rico.
Me too.
So I'd be okay with Puerto Rico going.
All right. Okay, well, so adios, Puerto Rico, and hello, High Frontier for all. That will be going on our shelf now. And what are we going to be talking about next time? I think, Eric, you mentioned that this High Frontier was the beginning of a sci-fi kick for us. Is that correct?
That's right. So High Frontier this week, a couple of weeks from now, we're going to be doing The Crew, which is another, it's a trick-taking game, but it's about finding the 9th planet.
Near future exoglobalization. That's what it's about.
Right. And then 2 weeks after that, we'll be covering Terraforming Mars. So, which is another same genre.
So look forward to that. Before we go, once again, if you have not subscribed to us, please hit the subscribe button. Help us out. If you want to ask a detailed rules question of Greg and Eric, since they're professional at High Frontier, feel free to leave us a comment.
Or go to BGG where the professionals actually answer.
No. By the way, don't do that.
By the way,
don't do that.
By the way,
comment.
We know that there are people out there that are not subscribed who are watching us because I see the analytics and I know who you all are. So Bob, hit that subscribe button. Okay. Quit watching us without being subscribed.
How dare you, Bob?
Yeah.
Bob.
So leave us a comment and like, and all the other things that help the mysterious YouTube algorithm. And Eric and Greg have both started their own little standalone series. So on Eric's side, we will help Eric collect his thoughts. He posts once a month on the 8th of every month, I believe is when we're going to release them. And then Greg is also going to be releasing videos, and we'll do those, I think, on the 3rd week of every month. Here's the logo.
Where are they?
Here's the logo right there. See it? For Greg's series.
Wow, I've lost some weight.
Yeah. So, be sure to check out Greg's series, be sure to check out Eric's series, be sure to check out our main series. And until then, this has been a piece of the action.
Okay, well, I know. So, Micah, do you know?
Well, I don't remember it, but I mean, obviously, I know it's not lore. I don't think it's lore.
Evil brother.
Yeah, I don't think it's. I don't know. My guess would be Leah. I guess Kamala is too.
She is not the vice president-elect of America.
Right. By the time this airs,
that's true. By the time
there hasn't been a civil war. Vice president. There hasn't
been a civil war.
Yeah. Greg, is it Lol or Leah?
It is Lol.
It is Lol. Okay.
Yeah.
LOL.
Really, LAL.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, of course.
No, I thought you'd known that.
LOL. I thought that's ridiculous.
Just for posterity's sake, yes. Lol. C.
All right.
And a really, really very emotional episode, honestly.
That was a good episode. It was a good episode.
That gal could act.
She could. And it was a nice continuation because Measure of a Man is one of my favorite Star Trek TNG episodes of all time. And this was kind of a continuation of that about like android
he
rights.
now has the right to procreate, basically.
Yeah, and what rights does she have and things of that nature. That was like expanding upon that premise. That's a great episode.
I was a little disappointed. Well, I shouldn't be surprised that I was a little disappointed in anything that came from Picard. But the Picard series makes no reference. That has a lot of tie-ins to Data's daughter.
They completely forgot what they had talked about.
Didn't even talk about Lol at all. And that too. Yeah.
Like they solved this issue. Why do we have slave labor on Mars?
Exactly. Why are there slave androids when you've already
we've done this already. We've been through this, Federation. We've been through this.